I would like to welcome Dr. Diya Datta for the presentation on Empowering Women to Transform Communities, a Heifer International initiative in Nepal.
Distinguished guests, panelists, senior members from Heifer, it's an incredible honor to be invited here to present before you this very interesting study that I was commissioned to do on behalf of Heifer. It's been a 2-year journey with Heifer, and I'm very happy to be here to present to you the findings of the detailed primary study that we did in 2021 in Nepal. I was here for 2 weeks interacting with women leaders and women members of the cooperatives, and it was a really eye-opening experience. I hope you also enjoy going through the findings of the study as much as we enjoyed conducting this study. So I think there's been a bit of an introduction for who I am. I've been specializing on gender studies for a very long time now. I worked with UN Women for 3 years. I've worked with Oxfam focusing on unpaid care work and women's labor issues. And I've worked extensively in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, even Nepal to some extent, and Afghanistan. And I've done a lot of studies on women's rights issues over the years. So, I mean, in that context, given that background of mine, the findings from the study were really eye-opening because patriarchal values and practices are so entrenched in South Asian context. The fact that these women are being able to break that silo and move forward and feel empowered and demand their rights is an incredible achievement. Next slide, please. So the rationale for this study was that Heifer International embarked on this SLVC program in 2012 with the primary intention of empowering women economically to rise above poverty and achieve sustainability in their incomes and livelihoods. So the primary aim was to try and test the impact of the program in terms of how far economic empowerment had been achieved. But colleagues on the ground had also realized that there were other spillover effects, and empowerment had been achieved in other areas also, but there was no evidence for that impact. So this study was designed in such a way that we were testing not just economic empowerment, but spillover effects on other areas of empowerment, such as gains in personal confidence, social and cultural empowerment, etc., etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about the findings, but I also want to share from time to time a little bit of what these incredibly feisty women spoke to us about their experiences. So for example, and of course to preserve their identity, we've changed all the original names of respondents that we spoke to, but one of the SHG members, Sadhana, said that the program is very good for women who were uneducated, unemployed, and have no income source. It teaches them about income-generating activities, and the cooperative helps in marketing the products. Its impact trail is long. It helps for providing seeds, giving training to helping in marketing, and providing us loan from the cooperative. We don't have to worry about anything. So I think that has been the USP of this program, that it didn't have a unidirectional target. It approached in a very holistic manner. So the report actually talks in details about the foundational rationale for the program, which is the value-based holistic development model, which is a form of community development model. And that's the holistic approach which I think has been the key reason for the success of this program. Next slide, please. So before we move to the findings of the program, I just want to speak a little bit about why gender equality and women's empowerment is important. Now, it's not just that there is inequality between men and women around the world, there's also inequality between women across the world, and that's what's called intersectional inequality, where women are not a homogeneous group, but they all have differing identities, and that places them at different points of inequality on a spectrum. So for example, the average life expectancy for women is 82 years in high-income countries, but only 63.1 years in low-income countries. So you can see that women from better-off economies live longer than women from low-income countries. Similarly, 64% of illiterate adults are women, which means 2 out of 3 women have never received any education. Girls and women spend 90% of their earned income on their families, like health, education, taking care of the sick and the elderly and the children, providing for food, etc., while men spend only 30 to 40%. This is one of the main reasons why targeting women has better development achievements than targeting men, because men often spend the money on alcohol or playing gambling or something like that. Then 1 in 4 women is physically or sexually abused during pregnancy. Every day, 39,000 girls are forced into early marriage. That's 27 girls per minute. Globally, nearly 40% of murders of women are committed by intimate partner. And inclusion and participation in decision-making processes. Women make up only 22% of parliamentarian seats across the world and 8% of the world's executives. South Asia performs reasonably badly on this. 95% of countries have a male head of state. So there are enough reasons that we've presented here which shows that why women in power leads to greater distribution of equality, greater opportunities for girls' education, health, and better development outcomes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about, over 2 years, we did 2 studies, 2-phase study on the SLVC program. The first one was the primary study, which we'll talk about here. But then subsequently, because the findings were so remarkable, we decided to benchmark the findings and compare them with nationally representative demographic and health survey findings, the DHS study, which for Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, along with Hafer indicators. I'll talk about that later. Right now, we'll talk about the primary study. It was a mixed sampling method approach. The SLVC2 supports 156 cooperatives, of which we selected 25. For the qualitative study, 10 cooperatives were selected for focus group discussions and key informant interviews with female beneficiaries and their male family members. Yeah, so for the quantitative study, a total sample of 251 respondents selected randomly from select districts where the SLVC 1 and 2 programs are being implemented. And of that, 176 were female respondents and 75 were male respondents who, out of those 176 female respondents, we chose male respondents, male family members from those 176. Next slide, please. Little bit about the profile of respondents. In terms of age, 74 of the 176 female beneficiaries were 30 to 39 years, followed by 59 of the 176 female respondents were 40 to 49 years. A majority of the female respondents were Hindus. The in terms of caste, almost equal distribution of upper caste, BCT, and Janjati who are highly respected in the caste hierarchy. They're also followed by the Dalits. So we had a few Dalit respondents as well. Most of the 40 plus female beneficiaries had minimal and informal education, whereas a significant portion of the 30 to 39-year-olds showed more encouraging trend on women's education with some degree of institutional education in their profile. Among the women beneficiaries surveyed, maximum reported annual income between Nepalese rupees 2 lakh to about 5 lakh. Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide. So it's interesting to note the difference in the economic and the social and political situation of the women before the SLVC program was introduced and the transformation that happened after that. So for SLVC 1 and 2 programs were introduced to communities living at subsistence level. Poverty levels were extremely high. They were highly in debt. There were low yields and low profitability. Women had no independent income, they were considered inferior to men and were time poor, had low knowledge or awareness levels, were underconfident and had no decision-making power, whether at the household or the community level. Women dependent on husbands for expenses or decisions were hesitant to ask for money, affecting well-being and children's health and education outcomes. Men and women worked in fields or did cattle rearing without scientific training, sold produce at low prices and limited market connectivity. There was limited access to capital or loans, high debt levels from moneylenders charging high interest rates. Little knowledge of starting businesses or alternative income sources beyond traditional means, and the economy was mostly driven by men. Next slide, please. Again, one more quote which talks about how indebted the women were before the SLVC program was introduced. Women who were discarded by the society as they were economically poor used to take thousands of loan, and they have even paid NPR 80,000 as the interest to the sum of a loan they took for merely 25,000 because they were not able to pay the debts. This was because the economic status was very bad at the time. It took plenty of years to pay their debts back. But this situation is no more prevalent as the SHG as well as the cooperative members are empowered and can earn for themselves. Next slide, please. So I spoke about the holistic development approach of this program. This particular data is testimony to that holistic approach. So essentially, although this was a program to improve the economic status of women farmers in select districts, the program did not approach women directly or solely. The program assumed that women were an organic part of households and families and communities, and therefore approached the community as a whole and the household as a whole, which is why the support from family members, especially husbands, was very critical in the success of the story, where the women joined the program and stayed on. The sustainability of the program depended on women staying on the course. The problem with a lot of development programs in South Asia is that women are unable to stay on the course. And what HEFA did was to try and understand that that sustainability question could be addressed by getting the support of the family towards the women. So here you see that 55% of the female respondents said that their husband supported them in joining the HEFA program. And a lot of advocacy was done with family members, senior family members, the husband, father-in-law, mother-in-law, which led to the success of the story. Next slide, please. The other holistic approach testimony of this program comes from business sources of income. So here you'll see that 47% of major business sources was goat. So goat production has seen tremendous improvement and increase since HEFA's intervention, because HEFA not only provided goats to the women through the SHGs, but also provided agrovet training, good quality fodder or forage seeds for production of feed, and access to stable markets for selling the goats. There is also plan of opening abattoirs for goat meat processing, which is in progress. At the time of the study, COVID-19 had slowed down the process, but I believe it's started now. So again, if you want to improve goat production business, it's not enough to just provide goats. It's important to look at the entire environment which is supporting this kind of business, and that's what HEFA did. It approached in a holistic manner, and it tried to provide support to all the allied areas in which goat production success was manifested. Next slide, please. The other significant impact is education. We don't have the data here, but we've done some analysis of national educational levels in Nepal. And like South Asia, other South Asian countries, women's education is significantly low, but in the HEFA intervention areas, women seem to be more educated than men in the communities, both in SLVC 1 and SLVC 2. The HEFA program has had a significant impact on female, especially young girls' education, and although the quantitative data was not designed to capture it in that way, but the qualitative data captured that 100% of respondents in focus group discussions and key informant interviews emphatically supported the importance of providing education to girls. Next slide, please. And because the thrust of the program has been on all-round development, holistic, organic development, what we notice here is that there has been no one sector which has gained at the cost of others. There has been overall development for women. So there is financial support in terms of facilitated credit input capital for starting business. There's been increased self-confidence, increased knowledge of business processes, increased skills for undertaking income-generating activities, provided technical training, created women support group through SHGs and cooperatives. So many of them, so many different areas in which women beneficiaries stated that they have seen empowerment. Next slide, please. So in continuation of the previous discussion, what I wanted to show you here is that 99% of the female beneficiaries said that they have gained in confidence since they joined the HEFA program, which is a significant thing because I think the next slide has a quote which talks about how women were very scared of speaking in the public or taking up leadership roles. So this is a significant achievement. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a quote from one of the project participants. And she says, I joined SHG from the beginning of the program. Sometimes I had to give a speech, but I would feel afraid. My face used to turn red in front of everyone. That was very shameful for me. But I learned from my mistakes. I learned public speaking. and I learned to give an introduction. Later, I started giving cornerstone training to other women like me. I encouraged them to take membership in the cooperatives. I am still learning. For me, the greatest achievement has been to be able to speak in front of the crowds. I feel confident while I speak in mass gatherings now. I attribute this transformation to HEFA. They used to motivate us regularly. They believe in our abilities. I'm so thankful to HEFA. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, this, in the context of South Asia, sources of savings, is quite a significant improvement because typically in South Asia, women save informally. So there are two examples I'd like to share. One is I did a study for World Bank, which is a similar kind of qualitative impact study on an economic empowerment program for women, where we were testing an indicator which showed how many women were saving as informally as under the bed. And the numbers were very high for that. Similarly, I'm sure all of you will recall that when the demonetization policy was introduced in India, a lot of women lost their life savings because they had saved informally. And all of that money was lost because they could not convert it into formal savings. And they also faced a lot of violence because of that, because they had hidden that money from the male members of the family, and that led to backlash and all of that. So that's the context in South Asia. Here, if you see, since the intervention of the program, so in the HEFA-supported cooperatives, 51% of female beneficiaries are saving. 24% in other cooperatives, 17% in banks. So first of all, this program has instilled a habit of saving, which is very important. Second of all, that saving is in formal to semi-formal institutions, which is also a very significant stride in terms of this program. Next slide, please. One of the most striking findings from this study has been about freedom from violence and crime. So almost all women and their family members admitted to the fact that before the intervention of the HEFA SLVC program, both violence against women and girls, and especially domestic violence, was prevalent. Alcoholism was a major issue, and a lot of social and domestic turmoil and wife beating was present. With the intervention of the HEFA SLVC program, violence against women and girls and domestic violence has now significantly reduced. Still, stray incidents happen, but the group membership gives the women strength, and they visit homes where violence has occurred and counsel the perpetrators. So, again, 77% of the female respondents mentioned that they feel completely safe at home, and 65% said that they feel completely safe in the communities, which is quite high given the levels of violence against women in South Asia. And of course, I just wanted to point out that while reporting of violence in South Asia is grossly underreported because of patriarchal norms and practices, I think given the approach of the SLVC program, which tries to empower women in multiple ways, the findings here are robust, and they're not either over or underreported. Next slide, please. This is also quite a significant finding. The left, The left-hand side is the findings from women beneficiaries, and these are the male family members' findings. This is on care work. So this light blue bar talks about cleaning house and washing dishes. Now, so the indicators we chose for testing care work, attitudes towards gender equality in care work were cleaning house and washing dishes, preparing food, taking care of children, fetching water, and farm work. Now, normally, and I mean, I've done a lot of studies on this in the region, there's a hierarchy in men and women sharing care work. So, for example, farm work, fetching water, which are work that is outside the home, more men perform that kind of care work. But things like cleaning house and washing clothes is something very low down on the hierarchy where men almost never perform that kind of work. In fact, in northern India, unless the woman is in her advanced stages of pregnancy or very unwell, the men will never perform that kind of work. So here, we notice something very unusual, which is almost 56% of male family members said that cleaning house and washing dishes should be performed equally by the man and the woman, which is quite an outstanding finding because, I mean, of course, there's a difference between opinion and actual practice, and maybe at a later stage, that's something that can be tested out. But even in terms of opinion, so many men, more than 50% men, agreeing to the fact that they should help their women in cleaning house and washing clothes, one of the most low-down priorities of care work for men, is incredible. Next slide, please. So now we come to the comparison of Hafer study with DHS data. The Demographic and Health Surveys database for India, Nepal, and Bangladesh have been used. India's latest DHS was conducted in 2019-21, Nepal for 2016, and Bangladesh for 2017-18. The main variables of interest for the study were women empowerment indicators, which were manifested and include sub-indicators like employment of women, agency of women, freedom of movement, ownership of assets, experience of violence, and help-seeking behavior. Next slide, please. So in terms of the methodology that we used, this was a secondary study, of course. A comprehensive list of women empowerment indicators across all surveys were prepared, out of which those indicators have been chosen which are common across at least 2 surveys. But what we've done is, because we took India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, we did not select indicators which were common between India and Bangladesh. We always kept Nepal as a common reference point. So it was either India and Nepal, or Bangladesh and Nepal, or India, Bangladesh, and Nepal common indicators. Where exact data wasn't available for comparison, proxy indicators for the Hafer study have been used, where the context of the questions have been same or similar. A master sheet of data has been prepared with demographic data for all indicators across the 4 surveys, which is then used to conduct comparative analysis. There are 2 components of the comparative analysis. One is the context setting, which consists of only DHS indicators of women's empowerment, and other is the analysis which compared the DHS data with the Hafer study. For this presentation, we will look at only indicators that are comparable with the Hafer data. Next slide, please. So the first one is on financial independence of women. So for the DHS, the indicator is, this is a proxy indicator we've taken. So for the DHS, the indicator is person who decides how the women's cash earnings are used, with the option of wife herself, husband, both jointly. We have only looked at the two categories of managing herself and taking help from her husband for uniformity with the other surveys. For the Hafer study, we take a two-part question. The first question is, can you manage finances for your business on your own? Those that answer yes, which is 87% of the respondents, are listed under self. Of the 13% that said no, we refer to the question, who helps you with managing finances for your business, with options including spouse, in-laws, other relatives, and others. Majority chose husband, which constitutes around 10.2%. Since we have not chosen all the options from DHS and the Hafer study, hence the figures do not add up to 100%. So here, if you see, Nepal, financial independence of women nationally for Nepal is highest among the three countries between Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, which is at 52%. But for Hafer Nepal, that's much higher. It's at 87%. Next slide, please. So for ownership of assets, we used a direct indicator. Hafer shows that 77% of women, this one. Hafer Nepal shows that 77% of women in their study have a bank account. This was even more than male family members who had only 73%. The other, this is comparable with India, which has 79% women who hold bank accounts. This is because of the policy of the government for opening Jan Dhan accounts. But as of 2021, 18% of Jan Dhan accounts are lying dormant, which means that Hafer Nepal's achievement is at par with India nationally. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, this one is a proxy indicator. For the DHS, the indicator is whether a woman can take decisions on her own healthcare, household purchases, and visit to her family or relatives. The options include if women decide it themselves, if they decide it jointly with their husbands, if their spouse mainly decide, or if someone else decides. For the purpose of the comparative analysis, we look at the option of mainly women and the spouse jointly in the overall participation for 3 decisions. For the Hafer study, the question is, are you able to take decisions regarding household matters on your own? Again, Hafer performance is much higher. It's at 78%. Nepal is at nationally representative data for Nepal is at 38%. Hafer is at 78%. And it's comparable to India, which is at 71%. Next slide, please. Again, a direct comparison on spousal violence. We've taken 2 indicators here, if she burns the food and if she neglects the children. The navy blue burns the food and the light blue neglects the children. Now, in general, Nepal on burns the food is pretty low. It's at 3. And Hafer is comparable with Bangladesh, both of which are at 1. But on neglects the children, both Nepal and India are pretty high. Nepal is at 24 and India is at 28, whereas Hafer Nepal is at only 2. So obviously, social norm change when it comes to spousal violence has been achieved through this program. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the SLVC program has not only been empowering, but also transformative. And by transformative, we mean changing social norms for better gender equality, bringing about sustainable economic change by raising people from poverty, preparing communities to be resilient against economic and natural shocks, addressing patriarchal mindsets and customs and practices, ensuring peace, harmony, and solidarity in the communities, and instilling a sense of self-worth and confidence in women and men to become agents of change. The intervention has led to increase in self-confidence, support to girls' education, and improvement in basic literacy among beneficiaries. It has also helped in inculcating a habit of saving, especially in Heifer-supported cooperatives, and an increased interaction with formal financial institutions. The beneficiaries and their male family members also believe in sharing care work of the household equally between a husband and wife, which we think is a significant transformation. We feel like these women who are very feisty and aware of their rights and responsibilities are smashing patriarchy because they are walking hand in hand equally with the men in their communities and households. Compared to the DHS data of India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, Heifer beneficiaries were better at managing their own finances, had higher ownership of bank accounts, were more active in participation in household decision-making, and a lower tolerance for violence. Next slide. Nina? I'd also like to acknowledge that the DHS comparison was, I was helped by my young colleague, Apurva Mahendru, who unfortunately can't be here, but she's joined in online. She helped me with that data, and it's been a joint effort. Thank you very much.